I met David Lynch at the AFI. We were fellows in the early 70s together. We hit it off very well. They had started to shoot the film with another cinematographer. Herb had to leave, unfortunately. But they showed me some scenes, and it was so totally intriguing. You know, it was very moody and beautiful black and white quality. And they saved the shots of the baby for last in my little interview reel. So that was, you know, kind of the hook, of course.
David Lindemann introduced David Lynch to Jack Nance and myself, and David asked me if I would be interested in playing the nurse who gives Henry and Mary their baby. And then he cast Jack Nance, who was my husband. So we kind of came as a team, and I got a chance to work on the movie because we didn't shoot the scene with the nurse until the very end, and then we wound up not shooting it at all because we really ran out of money.
It's interesting how I was cast for Eraserhead. My roommate was volunteering at the American Film Institute, was working with Jack Fisk. She came home one day and she said, there's a student that's doing a film, they're looking for an actress to play one of the roles. I went, great. So David Lynch and his wife Peggy came to dinner at our house, and David brought me, you know, most people bring flowers or a bottle of wine. He brought me a sack of wheat seed. I have no idea what he was thinking, that, you know, living in the country, that would be something I could use. So anyway, we had this wonderful dinner, and I thought he was a little odd because he was wearing a shirt that was real frayed at the collar and cuffs, a jacket with holes in it, not only holes in the elbows, but holes in the shirt, and 2 neckties. I asked him, why are you wearing 2 neckties? He said, well, one is the one I chose for today, and one's the one I always wear. And then when we shot, he wore 3 neckties.
He never auditions actors. He just meets you and talks to you and then decides.
He sort of stood over there and looked at me and looked at me and looked at me. And then he said, that'll do.
He really didn't interview very many people, but he pretty much cast the way he wanted and then trust the actor to do what he cast them for. My nephew, Tom Coulson, is the kid who found the head. He was about 13 at the time and was visiting Jack and me, and David asked him if he would be in the movie.
About the time that I was asked if I wanted to be in Eraserhead, I had just started shooting Little House on the Prairie. So I was shooting the show in the daytime and Eraserhead at night, because David shot all night long. We would meet at midnight, maybe 11 p.m., and shoot until 5 or 6 in the morning. I was a little schizophrenic, as you can imagine, not to mention a little tired.
The AFI was a wonderful spot. It was an old mansion on a hill in Beverly Hills. You know, we were the misfits. I drove the funkiest, loudest old car into Beverly Hills every day to get to shoot Eraserhead. And I was always worried that because of the muffler problem, the police were going to pull me over. And occasionally they did, just because in Beverly Hills, you don't do that sort of thing, you know? So we were definitely outsiders. Eraserhead was even an outsider within that world because David had allocated the stables as his area to shoot. And he built sets down there, and the AFI was good enough to give us just enough equipment and lights that we could use, and it was ours. It was our space, our sets, our lighting equipment, and they were very supportive. They really made it happen for us. And the best part was, once we were there, they kind of forgot about us. So we just kind of kept shooting away.
Everything was at AFI, and it felt very, I don't know, claustrophobic, but not so much that, but it felt right for what we were doing. This place, these rooms, this room he was in, Jack.
One of the reasons we shot at night was because the gardeners worked during the daytime. So as soon as they stopped working, we came in and set up. And we would stop when Alan Splett would hear birds. I remember he would say, birds, birds. Okay, we'd stop shooting.
It was a film that didn't really have a script. You know, there wasn't a script that David showed us in a traditional sense.
His vision really started with an outline and then storyboarding everything. So he would storyboard what he was going to do that night in the afternoon when he woke up.
And there was a series of note cards. It was the most intriguing part that had a bunch of little movie frames drawn on them with, you know, small characters and signs within them, little cryptic notes that was the movie on this series of cards that you couldn't possibly understand, you know, but it was all clear to David, really.
When I read it, I didn't understand it, but I wasn't too worried because I figured it's a student film. What's it going to take? You know, 3 weeks, maybe. I didn't know it was going to take 6 years.
He sort of emanated someone who knew exactly what he wanted and the desire to do that. Because from the beginning, I felt that I trusted him.
It took me a while to get a handle on the role of Mary. I'll tell you what helped me a lot. Before we shot every day, David would put an ear infection in my ear. I mean, it never showed, but that was like, Mary always had like eczema or an ear infection or a sty. She was always kind of sickly. And so that helped in when I would portray her, it was always with kind of a slump. You know, it's not shyness, it was kind of a, I'm not very important, and that made me feel it, you know.
He did describe kind of what he wanted, but he didn't really go all out on that. We just started to talk about how I would be in that, what I was going to do.
The way that David would direct was I got this right away when he started, that he was very specific on what he wanted. And I'll give you a perfect example. There's a scene where Mary is fed up with the baby, with Henry, everything, and she's leaving. She's going home. And she goes to the door and then she stops and gets down under the bed and reaches for something. And she's pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling till you think, oh my God, what is she doing? And Henry is looking at her and the bed is shaking. And she pulls out a suitcase and then leaves. And, you know, up until the moment you see the suitcase, you have not got any idea. When we were shooting that, David said, just keep pulling till I tell you to pull it out. And I thought he had gone way too far. And that is more David's style. He lets things go beyond the point of comfort, and he gets something else.
Shooting the scenes over 4 or 5 years wasn't so much of a problem except for keeping Jack Nance's hair pretty much the same. It doesn't always match. When I saw them film recently, I realized it didn't completely match. David designed it. We had a barber cut it, and then I got to execute it. And I think execute's probably the right word. I had to keep backcombing Jack's hair for over 4 years. I think it put a strain on the marriage for sure.
Jack Nance had this just natural, sweet, not so much sweet, it wasn't sweet. It was, he had a great quality for this. He had a great presence for it. And it was great working with him.
Jack was a trooper. Jack was a real pro. You know, he did what needed to be done, and he maintained this character for years and years.
Working so closely with the man I was married to was both wonderful and difficult, so that eventually changed. But Jack and I stayed really good friends, and then we did Twin Peaks together. He played Pete Martell, so we had a chance to kind of have a full circle relationship. David also named Pete Martell's wife Catherine in Twin Peaks, and I think partly that was to torture Jack, and partly so that he would say Catherine the way he used to say it to me with his Texas accent.
The crew of Eraserhead was great. It was very small, very concentrated group. Everyone did everything. So I got to be the cinematographer who designed the lighting and operated the camera, but I also got to set every light myself and all the flags and Sometimes I had to help push the dolly a little bit while we were shooting. So it was a very small crew.
The first thing I did was hold the boom for Alan Splett, and I learned about sight lines and things like that. This was really my film school because I had always been an actor. I learned how to hang an inky. I learned how to adjust barn doors. I learned then how to pull focus, learned about lenses, learned about this huge CM3 camera that the AFI had, and I learned how to load film magazines and pretty much do everything, including making lunch and breakfast and dinner for the crew. One of the hardest things I did was drive really fast in my Volkswagen to the lab to get there by midnight every night for the first batch of dailies.
It was a great lab called Consolidated Film Industry, CFI in Los Angeles. It was one of the independent labs of the time, but certainly a competitive one. And AFI had a deal with them. Sid Solo was the president. He really took care of us.
Fred Elmes had classes during the day as a cinematography fellow. I had different various waitress jobs and working at the AFI offices and worked in the directing workshop for women. Jack Nance delivered flowers. In fact, if you just said Mother's Day, he would just turn pale. He just hated that job. But we all did different jobs. David had this paper route in the middle of the night. But we would convene whenever possible at the stables in what we called the food room. And in that room, for our leisure time, David played the trumpet, Alan Splett played the cello, and we would have little concerts. And usually it was around food, pretty much the same food every day. We all helped with the paper route. We would wrap the rubber bands around them and load up the car and then take a break in the middle of shooting. It was a paper route that was supposed to take many hours, and David did it in, I think, less than 2. Sometimes Jack would go with him and help him throw out the other side of the car. He put the top down. So we pretty much became like a family. I mean, that's kind of a cliche in a way, but we really did.
It was a very special situation. Hardly ever have I experienced a situation quite like that.
David always paid us, and that was really important to him. He was one of the few filmmakers doing a student film, albeit over a long period of time, where everybody got paid, and we all got $25 a week. And then I remember when the AFI started saying, you know, we can't really give you much more money, we went to $12.50 a week. And I pretty much spent that on grilled cheese and egg salads.
One of the stopping periods, I shot a film with John Cassavetes. You know, I shot The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, which was a great experience for me to meet John, who was someone I always loved his work, but was so very much the opposite of David Lynch. So here we have John Cassavetes saying that the camera needs to be fluid and a little rough and handheld and forget the camera noise. And I would be holding the camera for the shot and he would bump me just in order to make the camera. And then David Lynch saying, well, no, we don't move the props on Eraserhead. You know, this is all set. So very different filmmaking experience, but both rather maverick, you know, directors with visions. As the production went on, we couldn't always afford film, so we got some short ends from this production or that. And Peter Bogdanovich was shooting a film in black and white, and when he wrapped the production, they had a load of unused negatives that they could sort of ship over to us, and it just kind of went into our stash. And in the end, David said, you know, we're almost done, but not quite. You know, I run out of money. AFI can't help us anymore. You know, we're going to have to stop. And we said, well, David, we can't stop. It's almost done. You know, we'll just give you our time. We'll pitch in. And he said, but I haven't got, you know, I can't even afford film stock anymore. And that we have to buy at the moment. And so it became a regular thing that you stop by Kodak and pick up a roll of film on the way to work so that we had something to shoot that evening.
We were all sitting at Bob's Big Boy, and David said, you know, I really want to give everybody a piece of this film because it's not just mine, it's yours too. So we wrote on paper napkins our deal, how many points you would get. Now, we never really thought anybody would ever see it, but it was a wonderful gesture on his part, a very loving gesture. And to this day, I still get an Eraserhead check every year, which I really appreciate. That was way before ancillary rights or DVDs or Blu-ray had even been thought of. And there we were on paper napkins writing how many points who got. And years later, the checks started coming. It helped put my daughter through college. The world of David Lynch pretty much is a black and white world, at that time especially. So much of what we photographed was already black and white and shades of gray. Both Herb Cardwell, who shot the first few months, and then Fred Elmes, who shot the rest of the film, were big on shooting grayscales and testing, very short tests. And I remember one of my jobs being taking the sheets on Henry's bed and dipping them in tea or coffee so they wouldn't be such a bright white.
David had established a style. David's a painter, and the mood and the feeling of it and the tones of gray are very, very important. And yes, David had done tests about how this shade of paint on the wall photographs, and that was really, really important to him. So to maintain that, that's something we had to do. What looks great about black and white is when it's contrasty and when you just barely see a little bit in the shadows, but you're not sure quite what's there. And that's one of the things that intrigued David as well, is when you could see a little bit of something in the shadow, but not too much. You know, he got very interested then, because it's your imagination then. Your imagination just takes off. And one of the jokes was always, we should make this darker, because in the theater, we want it to be dark. We don't want to see anything in that shadow, because there's a mood to it. I would light a scene, and he would look through the camera, and he could say, you know, yes, it's working, no, it's not working, just by looking through the camera. I mean, he could see the light really, really clearly and knew if it worked for the scene. So, yes, all those little details of the light, the little splash of light on the wall were intentional. I mean, they were all there, placed precisely because that was the feeling of Henry's world. That was really, really important to David.
We were able to shoot Eraserhead in what really became like a miniature soundstage. The stables were all these little rooms, and David built Henry's room. He made sound blankets. We had a very nice, quiet set.
The exterior of Mary's, the exterior of his building, much of that was down at the stables. We could use little bits outside, and then we built everything inside. Then we went downtown, and downtown Los Angeles was just beautiful. You know, we'd go there and we'd lay out very, very specific shots. And, you know, if for some reason a modern car was parked in one of our shots, we'd just go home because we couldn't shoot it. You know, you can't move it and you can't shoot around it, so you'd have to, or if it was sunny. You know, we planned only for shooting on overcast days, which in Los Angeles is tough.
One of the things I loved the most about working on Eraserhead was doing research. And David would ask me if I could find certain things. Doreen Small picked out a lot of the props from street sales, and the Rose Bowl had a great swap meet. A lot of the set decorating was done by David. He sculpted a lot of the fine artwork on the elevator, the deco stuff he made out of wax. He really is a hands-on kind of guy and likes to do stuff himself. There's a beautiful bedside table in Henry and Mary's room, and David made all of that himself. One of the research opportunities I had was to call around to special effects departments and ask questions like, how do you fill a room full of mush? David and Alan Splett had a terrific relationship, and they would discuss the effects at the time, some of which he recorded live, and then many of which he did afterwards in a kind of makeshift Foley stage, which was also in the stables, where they were editing with an old moviola. And I remember a friend of mine editing in another room at the AFI, being called in the middle of the night by David saying, do you have a radiator in your room? And she said, yes, I do. And he said, can I come in and record the sound of the radiator? And she said, well, I don't know if the radiator's on. He said, no, I just need the sound of somebody jumping off the radiator. So that became kind of one of those wonderful stories that's really true of David's sound effects and the recording of them. The LA Film Exposition was the first place that there was a major screening of Eraserhead. It was late at night. It was in a huge theater in Century City. It was a big deal.
They had established a kind of a surprise screening event, a midnight screening. It was kind of one of the first times anyone had done that. And they'd say, okay, just show up Saturday night at midnight. It's going to be a film that you won't forget by a filmmaker you probably have never heard of, and it'll be an experience. We're not going to tell you anything more. Just come, pay for your ticket. And the theater was packed. I mean, it was a big theater in Los Angeles, and it was packed.
My brother came with his 7 children because my nephew, Tom Coulson, found the head. And I remember my brother putting his arm out over the eyes of all the little kids during a lot of the movie and saying to me later, you know, Kathy, you could have told us. And I said, well, I just thought it was a simple little love story. I mean, that's what it felt like, because that world became so normal for us over the years that it didn't seem at all unusual.
The credits started, and you could hear a pin drop. I mean, no one had any idea what to make of it. You know, it was just wonderful, but it got applause, and it got support, and, you know, it got a distributor.
I think the response was maybe more low-key than David might have wanted, but a couple of key people saw the film, and Libra Films picked it up to start these very slow midnight screenings, slow in that they released it slowly. This wonderful man, Ben Bernholtz, I think is his name, said people will start to see it and word of mouth will get out. And that's exactly what happened.
The first time I saw the film was here in New York. I saw it and I was just, you know, hadn't seen any of it in California. It was a bit of a revelation, let's put it that way.
I have such fond memories of shooting Eraserhead that when I saw it again recently, I was surprised at some of it. I had forgotten what the story was about because I have such wonderful memories of the actual making of it. But one of the scenes I love the most is Jack as Henry walking down the hall, getting his mail, going in the room, lying on the bed and looking at the radiator and looking out the window.
I don't know what the plot is, and if you ask David, he won't tell you. He says it's up to the audience. And the best way I can describe it is if you go to a museum and you're going room to room and you're looking at beautiful art, you really shouldn't try to figure it out. You need it to wash over you. You need to just go into it and let it affect you.
During the time of making Eraserhead is when he came up with the idea for the Log Lady. And we used to talk about this series that he would make someday called I'll Test My Log with Every Branch of Knowledge. And that really came about because of the pencil scene in Eraserhead, talking about making erasers and David's knowledge of ponderosa pine, because his father worked for the Forest Service. So it really changed my life in many ways, in that I got an opportunity to do Twin Peaks as a result of my labor of love on Eraserhead. David really does come through when he says he's going to do something. It might have been 14, 15 years later that he asked if I was ready to do The Log Girl.
You know, after Eraserhead, David and I had a chance to work together on a couple of other films, and the advantage of that is that I had a great extended collaboration with him on Eraserhead, so there's many things we didn't need to talk about anymore, you know, that we'd already done.
I learned a lot from him. When I think back on it, as small as it is, it's gorgeous. Just not because I was younger, but because it just is a beautiful idea and moments.
Well, we used to joke about, would somebody ever do their hair like Henry? And then years later, there were musicians wearing their hair like that. It was just an astonishing thing to see. We actually didn't ever know that anybody would ever see the movie, which is the other reason I think it's so successful, is that it was really a labor of love, and it was a labor of one person's vision as an artist coming through on film stock that we all got to help with and be part of. So I think for the most part, it was the process of making the film and being in the moment. And staying in the moment meant that we weren't really aware of time passing so much. So it may have taken 4 years of shooting, maybe 5 years with post-production, but every minute felt filled up and rich.